Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lizzie Medvedow, Executive Director of the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy at Boston College Law School, along with my colleagues at the Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston at the Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome to today's debate, Should MCAS be required for high school graduation? A program of the Greater Boston Debate Series. For housekeeping purposes, this program is being recorded and we are reserving 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions, and we will hopefully get to as many as we can. A few years ago, the Rappaport Center and Rappaport Institute launched this series to explore timely and controversial topics of great importance to residents of Massachusetts and sometimes beyond. Our goal is to have dynamic conversations among experts with powerful moderators that illuminate the various sides of issues. Respectful discourse is always at the foundation of these discussions, which can, as we often say, get messy, but are conducted with the objective of educating all of us. This afternoon, we're tackling the subject of the MCAS exam, the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, which was created as a result of the then transformative Massachusetts Education Reform Act in 1993 and first implemented in 1998. Now, 25 years later, there is much controversy about whether the exam remains the appropriate way to assess students. There may, in fact, be a ballot question on this precise topic in 2024. You'll hear more about that, I'm sure, during the conversation. So let me introduce our moderator, and she, in turn, will introduce our expert panelists. Mandy McLaren is a Boston Globe reporter for The Great Divide, an investigative team focused on educational inequities. She's been covering education since 2016. In early October of this year, Mandy and a colleague co-wrote a multi-part series, Lost in a World of Words, on why so many Massachusetts students are struggling to read. She formerly worked for the Louisville Courier-Journal, and her reporting on the improper use of mental health assessments in Kentucky's largest school district was named the best investigative reporting of 2020 by the National Awards for Education Reporting. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post and USA Today. She's worked as an adjunct professor in journalism at Indiana University Southeast and as a public school teacher and administrator in New Orleans. She has a master's degree in investigative journalism from American University in Washington, D.C., and bachelor's degrees in political science and broadcast journalism from Boston University. So with that, I now turn the program over to you, Mandy, with thanks.
Wow, thank you. I got the long bio there. I have to live up to that now. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to moderate this debate. And I am joined by two esteemed men in the state of Massachusetts education. We have the president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, Max Page, and the executive director of the Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education, Ed Lambert. Now, before we get started and I throw it over to them, just to make clear, today we are not discussing whether or not MCAS should exist, although that might be a fine debate for another day. That's not what our intent is today. Today we are discussing whether or not it should be used to determine whether students can graduate with a full high school diploma. And I'm going to start things with Ed, I believe.
Thanks, Mandy. Thank you very much. And let me start by thanking Lissy and the folks at the Rappaport Center. We're just really pleased that they do this work and allow for these opportunities for conversation. And Max, I want to thank you for engaging in this conversation today, and start by offering collective thanks to the state's teachers for the work they do on behalf of students all the time, particularly through the pandemic, not only keeping them safe, but keeping their learning moving forward. And everyone is just so appreciative of, and should be appreciative of, the work that teachers do every day. Mandy, it's an honor to share the platform with you. The work that you and the Great Divide team do is awesome, and we learn from it all of the time. And last but not least, let me thank everyone who's in the Zoom room today for taking the time to listen and dive in on this. You know, public policy is always more nuanced than 140 characters will allow, than a bumper sticker will allow, and sometimes even a ballot question will allow. So I'm certainly pleased to be here with you, and very pleased to be associated with the Mass Business Alliance for Education, an organization with a long and impactful history in Massachusetts. I'm also very lucky and privileged to have had the opportunity to have several career experiences, all of which have helped form my perspective on this and related issues. I was able to serve on my local school committee beginning at the age of 21. I earned my teacher certification, but went into social work instead, working with youth and families. I served in the state legislature during the years when the Education Reform Act in Massachusetts was being debated and passed. I served 12 years as mayor of my city of Fall River, chairing the school committee during that time, and also ran a research center focused on urban education and dropout prevention. And now I get a chance to help lead an organization that represents nearly 40 business groups in every corner of the state and in every industry sector, with a mission of supporting access to high quality educational experiences for all students in preparation for college, career, and citizenship. MBAE as an organization was founded by Paul Revel, someone whose name is probably familiar to most people in the audience. He was an educator, and Jack Rennie, a business leader from central Massachusetts, and they came together during a time of great inequity in education in Massachusetts, wanting to help spur greater interest from the business community into helping improve public education. And they wrote a report called Every Child a Winner, with the emphasis on the word every. And that report became the basis of the '93 Ed Reform Act, which included some significant new state funding for schools and a number of reforms designed to advance student success and ensure equity. That legislation was bipartisan. It was supported by parents, teachers unions, businesses, state leaders, and local leaders. And it was passed within the context that schools needed more money. They certainly, particularly in poor communities, could not fund a quality education based solely on property taxes. So it was predicated on getting more state funds into those districts, that schools needed reform, and that third and most importantly, you couldn't or shouldn't have one of those without the other. It was essentially the first of the legislative grand bargains, so to speak. And one of the reforms in that legislation is the subject of today's debate, the establishment of a single statewide standard for graduation from high school that would ensure that a diploma would mean something, ensure that we had satisfactorily educated our students to be college and career ready, and more importantly, to ensure fairness and equity across districts, all of whom at the time had their own standards for graduation. Prior to 1993, there was a wide variation between standards and student expectations from one district to the next. In places like Fall River and maybe in some other poorer districts, getting by was the standard used for achievement. And in other, maybe wealthier communities or in other districts, getting ahead was the norm. And achieving postgraduate success was the standard. That changed in '93 with the establishment in this legislation of what's called a competency determination. We moved from a model where we now have a single statewide standard of high expectations for all students, and that we match that hopefully with an effort to help all students achieve that standard. That reform, along with others, has proven successful. Despite some concern when this graduation requirement went into effect for the graduating class of 2006, graduation rates went up, and they continue to rise. Overall, Massachusetts has risen in the rankings to first in the nation status in academic achievement. Achievement gaps have closed, even though we know we have much more work to do on that front. Having a single statewide standard for graduation is important. We have a common assessment that we call MCAS in Massachusetts, and the research has shown that MCAS is a very strong predictor of college and career success. In a sense, the title of today's program is a little bit off topic because this policy question we're discussing here today isn't really about the MCAS test itself. The test is only a measurement. The question at hand is whether we should maintain a single statewide standard for graduation. The ballot question that's been proposed by the Mass Teachers Association would eliminate the use of that standard and return us to having 330 plus different ones, leading to what we believe would be a lowering of standards and greater inequity in education. We shouldn't revert, we think, back to the way it used to be when we had different expectations and opportunities for students depending on their zip code and where they live. Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, Pat Tutwiler, recently in a WBUR interview said, correctly, we think, that every student is capable of passing the test. Our job is to help them do that. It's a rare policy initiative that shows consistent and sustained positive outcomes. And of course, we should always seek to evolve and improve all of our practices. But when you have something that works, you should keep it, evolve it, improve it, and build upon it, not eliminate it. And that's the argument that we hope to make today in this conversation with you all. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ed. Max?
Unmute here. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mandy. Thanks to Lissy and the staff of the Rappaport Center and Ed as well for being here and for being part of this debate. And good afternoon to everyone who's watching. So I'm Max Page. I'm president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, representing 117,000 public school and college educators in Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts, went to the public schools there, at the same schools where my 3 children also went. My mother was a public school teacher and principal in Rowe and South Hadley, and my dad taught for 35 years at UMass Amherst. And I probably everyone here as well, I consider my public education, our system of public education, the cornerstone of our democracy. And I'm so proud to be able to lead the 178-year-old MTA, which has been at the core of achieving the very finest public education system in the country. And I'm pleased to be here for this debate about such an important issue. And I'm also pleased to let you know that as of today, we've collected 120,000 signatures to put our initiative to eliminate the MCAS graduation requirement on next November's ballot. We will have in excess of 100,000 certified signatures, far in excess of the roughly 75,000 required, and more than any other ballot initiative this year. Yes, MTA members and our allies beat out Uber and Lyft and their bottomless reserves they have to buy legislation. And I give those numbers to remind you that the public wants a chance to vote on this, and they really care and want to get rid of the high stakes impact of MCAS once and for all. We have many polls to show that they want this change. So let me summarize our position and why I believe this is right for our public schools and students. No one is more trusted on education issues than our public school educators. That's because parents know that educators care about their children as whole people, not just as scores on a test. We look to educators to help children excel academically. We look to educators to help young people play and read and create and wonder. Educators teach children to work collaboratively, build trusting and healthy relationships, access their passions for art and music, and develop as future citizens. So that's why I think it's so important for us to listen to what the state's trusted educators are saying about the MCAS. For 20 years, my members, all of whom are public school and college educators, pre-K through higher ed, have been sounding the alarm about the harm caused by the high-stakes MCAS. They maintain it is educational malpractice to judge students and schools with a one-time test score. They want to spend more time on authentic learning, but are forced to waste weeks prepping for and proctoring standardized tests. They worry about the hundreds of students who miss the cutoff on one part of the MCAS and are denied a high school diploma. They have told me that the high-stakes testing regime is corroding an organic passion for learning. It makes them want to leave their calling and tell the next generation to find a better paying job where their professionalism will be more respected. According to data from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, more than 700 students per year, the number in a good-sized high school, who are disproportionately BIPOC, who have disabilities, or for whom English is a second language, leave high school without a diploma, limiting their opportunities for the rest of their lives. Massachusetts, Texas, Florida, Louisiana are among the few states still using a standardized test as a high school graduation requirement. Inappropriate uses of MCAS undermine the student experience in countless schools because it is the key measure state bureaucrats use to intervene or take over school districts as has happened in Holyoke, Southbridge, and Lawrence. And fearful of this threatens to schools, always where working class students of color live, devote more time and resources to boosting test scores. My members call this practice drill and kill. What gets killed? History, social studies, art, music, gym, civics, recess, project-based learning, tending to social and emotional skills while we are in the midst of a youth mental health crisis. So using DESE's own information, the greatest gains in learning across all demographic groups in the state happened when funds were flowing into public schools after the 1993 Education Reform Act, which incidentally was made possible by the McDuffie lawsuit the MTA helped craft. So those greatest gains happened in the decade or so when lots of money was flowing in, and when the MCAS was only a diagnostic test and wasn't being used to deny diplomas or threaten the democratic control of schools. But when the state doubled down on testing with the Achievement Gap Act of 2010 and coasted on its fiscal investments, then the gaps on state and national tests widened again. Money matters in education, which is why MTA members fought so hard to secure passage of the Student Opportunity Act in 2019, which will bring in an additional $1.5 billion a year into Massachusetts public schools by the 2027 school year, especially benefiting the lowest income districts. And outside of schools, students and their families need economic stability, which is why MTA members and allies have won universal sick time, paid family medical leave, a $15 minimum wage, and are now fighting to win debt-free public higher education so that all of our public school graduates can get the further education they need to win good jobs, develop new businesses, and build strong civic and cultural life. And most recently, we did what no other group has been able to do in over a century. We passed the Fair Share Amendment to make Massachusetts' tax system a bit more progressive, asking the wealthiest 0.5% to pay a little more, so we'd have $2 billion every single year for our public schools, colleges, and transportation systems. So, in other words, when we as a Commonwealth fight economic insecurity and when we invest in educators and all the support students need, we make it possible for students to learn to their highest abilities. That's why we agree with the person that Ed just mentioned, Paul Revel, who said in 2021, now generally psychometricians agree it's improper, inappropriate to attach high stakes to a single test. If policy makers want an accurate assessment of a child's skills and knowledge, they are far better asking a teacher who has taught a child an entire year, graded homework, observed class participation, evaluated final exams, and used all the tools to assess what the student has mastered and in what areas more attention is needed. Or they can rely on data from a standardized test with a narrow focus, which has been roundly criticized even by ed reform groups as in need of major overhaul. For parents and educators, I think it's really obvious. If the state wants more authentic learning, it should allow educators to do more real teaching and put less emphasis on testing. It should provide what educators are eager for and students need, such as more school counselors, mental health supports, especially in the wake of a hopefully once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. Educators also really want additional tools to create authentic academic and school assessments, such as those being used by the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment and around the country. That's real-world collaborative projects in place of bubble tests, surveys of students and parents on school culture and curricular offerings in place of MCAS-based school rankings. We need to understand that schools are really doing what we need to understand what schools are really doing and what students have learned and not how well they can take tests. I guess I really come to a conclusion by saying MCAS scores mislead the public into believing they are seeing an accurate measure of student and school achievement. It's not comprehensive. That's the C in MCAS. It's not the comprehensive assessment students or schools that the Education Reform Act of 1993 demanded. MCAS is not the best tool to measure what it purports to measure and certainly does not assess much of what matters to parents and students in a school. And yet it plays an outsized role in shaping what students experience every day. So we've won all together, educators, parents, students, the community allies have won big gains for school funding and greater economic equality. But now we need to reclaim real teaching from the destructive high stakes elements of testing so that every student has the opportunity to receive the great public education they deserve. So that's why we believe the MCAS as a graduation requirement has to go. And I would encourage you all simply to ask an educator what they think. Thanks.
Thank you, Max. You two both have clearly done your homework. We have a lot of points that you both made that I'd like to get to in the limited time that we have. I do want to give a little bit of context before we keep moving along here. According to Education Week, back with the class of 2014, about half of the states had a high school graduation requirement of passing a standardized test. That number has shrunk down to 13 states in 2019, and now I believe Massachusetts is only one of 8 states. So clearly there's a national trend going on here as we have this debate. But one thing that does make Massachusetts unique, and correct me if I'm wrong, Max, is that that is the only requirement that the state dictates. So should that go away, there would be no statewide expectation. And that is something that Ed brought up in his point. Would you like to reply to that?
Yeah, so that's actually not accurate. I think it's really important that we have our terms straight.
Okay.
Part of because we talked about testing versus standards, so I really want to clarify that, if that's okay. So the Ed Reform Act, one thing that the Education Reform Act of 1993 did, which again came out of a long time lawsuit that was actually came out right at the same moment. One thing that we got out of that was a commitment to statewide standards across our academic subjects. So those state standards exist, and they are strong, and we believe in them, and they apply to every single district. Then, and the MCAS was used, as I said, for those first decade. They were developing it and used simply as a diagnostic. But it is not the MCAS that sets the high standards that has made Massachusetts at the very top of all public schools in the country. It is two things. It is our high standards that we have created and maintain, and then it is the investments we made, substantial funding that we started making with 1993, and which has helped raise pay, that has hired educators, that has fixed up our buildings, provided supports that everyone needs. So I just want to make clear that we have standards, and in fact, our ballot initiative specifically speaks about having those standards, and that educators will build a curriculum as they do around those standards.
Sure. Absolutely, there are statewide standards, but unlike other states, right, there's no, DESE recommends Mass Core, the curriculum sequence, but there's no statewide requirement right now that every high school needs to have that as their local graduation requirement. So there is this question here of, if we no longer have MCAS as the unified expectation, then what? Would it be 300 different expectations? And what does that mean for a Massachusetts diploma? I guess I'm asking, if not this, then what?
Well, I guess I know I let Ed get in, but I do want to say, I just think that is not actually accurate.
Okay.
I know that's the argument, and I'm sure Ed will now have the chance to make that. But
I'm happy to let Mandy continue to ask the questions.
No, it's really we have high state standards, and that's a key, and that guides the curriculum that educators in each district have to offer.
But what is the what's the accountability measure in place to ensure that teachers are teaching to those high state standards without the MCAS?
Yeah, the MCAS does far more to measure a family income and family education than it does to actual measure achievement. I can tell you, based on a zip code, if you give me your zip code, I will tell you the average MCAS score, and I will be right 9 times out of 10. What we believe is that you set out strong, high stakes state standards, which we have across the disciplines, and then we entrust our educators and the school committees and superintendents and principals to develop a curriculum that helps us achieve those. And those have been shown, those grades that students achieve in not just Massachusetts, across the country, have been shown to be more accurate and less biased by race and income than test scores, which is partly why the Board of Higher Education and UMass have dropped the requirement to have an SAT or an ACT for admission to our public colleges and universities, partly because of the racial bias inherent in them.
Ed, I'm going to give you a chance to respond, and then I'm coming for you.
Sure, no, that's fine. And Mandy, thanks for asking those questions and giving me the opportunity to intercede here. I have to take strong exception to this notion that we can define how a student will perform based on their zip code and who they are and where they come from. That is just not the case. And that would bring us back to the old days of inequity or suggesting that certain students couldn't achieve certain standards. That's not true. And the MCAS data show us that some school districts do a much better job at educating students with similar demographics. And in fact, it was Brown University and the research done by John Pape that showed the direct correlation between MCAS scores and postgraduate student success when accounting for those issues, and that it had more to do with academic achievement and measuring that than it did with regard to socioeconomic status. So there's actual data that suggests that that is not the case. And I appreciate you bringing up this idea that Massachusetts would, if this ballot question passes, be one of only 3 states with no statewide standard at all. We've joined Pennsylvania and Vermont because the only statewide graduation standard we have is this one. And so if the ballot question passes, unlike other states that might require a curriculum, and by the way, other states do have high stakes tests that might not count for graduation, but such as in California, dictate what colleges you can go to and what courses you can take. In New York, the Regents exam, which gives you a different diploma based on whether or not you pass it or not. So there are exams in other states. They might have stakes other than the graduation piece. I think it's really important, and I'll grab back the Paul Revell mantle because it was just a few months ago when he and other secretaries of education wrote a strong op-ed in the Boston Globe, which spoke to the need to keep this requirement in place and that we shouldn't move back on that. And I think that's really important. I appreciated a lot of the arguments that Max said, some of which lead us to always wanting to continue to try to evolve and improve. And there are certainly things that we can do to improve MCAS, although it's been shown nationally to be a pretty strong test and very correlative of postgraduate success. And I also disagree when we suggest that the MCAS tells things about student success that families are not interested in hearing. Increasingly, they are very interested in knowing whether or not their students are going to succeed in college and whether or not they're going to succeed in career. We think those things are really important. Max raised a lot of issues with regard to MCAS generally and broad attacks on MCAS and its use as accountability and the like. Those are really kind of debates for a different day. This single standard is really important in ensuring equity across all districts. We cannot go back to a day and time when we have different standards or different sets of expectations for students. We don't disagree that teachers should not be drilling and killing, as that phrase goes. There is plenty of room throughout the course of one's K through 12 public education for music and arts and the like. What we've heard from a lot of educators is that the best way to prepare students to take the MCAS exam is high quality teaching. If we have to resort to drill and kill before a 10th grade exam, it really speaks to a lack of preparation over the course of one's K through 12 career to be prepared for that, because we are using MCAS as a regular assessment of student progress going forward. So certainly trying to backload that at the end as a result of the graduation requirement is not the kind of education that we think ought to be taking place. So we don't disagree. We think that students should be prepared for college, career, and citizenship, and that means a well-rounded education. And we do trust our teachers. The suggestion that we might not trust our teachers is a little bit misguided, but it's not individual teachers that will be making these decisions. We've all been in school. Some of us have taught. I've not had that privilege. But we know that grades can vary. In fact, the Pape research from Brown shows that MCAS is a better predictor of college success than GPA. And so that really goes to show you where parents are getting the right information. And it needs to be a consistent standard if indeed we're going to be able to not only be fair to students, but to have a system in place that maintains that high standard for all.
Mandy, can I just make one point? I know you want to go on, but I think it's really important. We're having a conversation here about the high stakes nature of MCAS, but I think Ed as well, moved into like the value of the MCAS overall, having the state standard as he understands it. But in fact, the moment we win this ballot initiative or the Thrive Act legislation, which also would eliminate the high stakes graduation requirement, we will still have the MCAS. It's a federal requirement. The test will be there. So for whatever diagnostic value that Ed and others may think it has, you will still be able to see that. And frankly, I think probably Ed agrees there needs to be changes in making that a better test. The results need to come sooner. It needs to be in more languages. Maybe it needs to take up less time. These are broadly held changes. That MCAS will still be here. So then the question is why the MBAE and many of the people who've wanted to have charter schools and, have stood for all these things, these ed reform things, why they're so focused on the graduation requirement when, and I'll just say last thing, which is that if you're going to cite Brown, I'll cite the Stanford Education School and its reports that showing that grades by qualified educators are a better reflection of student learning. So I guess I want to make clear to the audience as well, if we win this ballot initiative, there will still be an MCAS, and we can decide how good that is and how to make it better, but there will still be a statewide test for whatever diagnostic value we think it has.
Thank you. Ed, I want to give you a chance. I'm not sure if you responded to Mac's point about the disproportionate harm caused by the competency determination, the statistics that he brought up showing that it has a disproportionate impact on children from low-income homes, children of color, English learners. And that is, I think, a big concern when teachers are looking at how it's affecting their kids and when they have concerns. So where in your side of the debate do you address that?
Well, I think if you heard my initial remarks, while we've made progress on achievement gaps, we have not closed those gaps in Massachusetts. And that's something that I'm sure Max and I agree upon. And that the Student Opportunity Act of 2019 hopefully will go a long way toward addressing part of what we missed in 93, which was just how much you need in the way of resources to be spent on best practices to help high need students. And so really, again, it's not the MCAS that is creating that disparity. The MCAS as a measure is shining a light on that disparity. And so the impacts on achievement are clear. The disparity in terms of the graduation is clear. But I think that, and Max referenced this data a little bit earlier, as he said, it came from DESE. I think it's important to note this as well, that he referenced the 700 students. So it's about 1%, about 4% of students do not pass the MCAS before graduation, do not meet the competency determination. 75% of those, fully 3% of students, have also not met other graduation requirements at the local level. So we are talking about that number of 700, which quite honestly is reflective of some of the achievement gaps that we have. We need to try to do everything we can to help those 700 students get over that finish line. That is really where our focus should be, rather than changing the standard that has worked for so many students in districts over the course of 20 years. Let's figure out the strategy to help those students get there. Currently, we have an MCAS system for those of you in the audience who might not be familiar with it, where students have the opportunity to take the exam 5 times before graduation. For students that might either be test phobic or for one reason or another are meeting grades but not able to pass the exam, there are alternatives in terms of both the cohort alternative, where they can show through their grade work that they should they should achieve their competency determination, and they therefore can file for that appeal and meet their competency determination in that path. Their portfolio pathway for students in terms of putting their work together with the help of teachers to show that they've met the standards. So there are a number of ways in which students can meet that competency determination. We should be concerned about that 1% of students who for some reason are passing their local requirements, but not passing the MCAS. And we need to find out why that is and help support those students. But I think that when you see a disparity based on race and income in that number, that's really reflective of achievement gaps generally across the K through 12 system, and work that we just have not made enough progress on.
Max, did you want to reply?
Oh, there's a lot to reply to there. You know, one of the, I think that points are this. First thing, you know, it's interesting to kind of brush aside the fact that 700 or more students every single year have gone through public education, passed their exams, their courses, and then are going to be left without a diploma. That's not, you can say use 1%. I would rather use 600 individual humans who are out there and are denied that opportunity. And it tends to be some of our more vulnerable students. So we take that, every single student, seriously. And I think we've been speaking at a fairly, you know, high level, abstract level, citing, you know, studies and the like. But, you know, I just think of, as you were talking, I was thinking about a meeting that my vice president, Deb McCarthy, had with our local leaders and members in the Worcester area. And it just became just an incredibly moving night to hear from these educators who were just like, they were in tears, talking about individual cases of what this is doing to their students, the immigrant students who are coming in, test gets put in front of them, they have to take it. You know, someone was mentioning a student from, you know, who is Arabic, so they read a different direction, but they were forced to read this test and take it. Students who'd been shot, you know, had been involved in a shooting, a victim, but then when they came back to school, that was the test day, they had to take that. There are countless examples, and people were just impassioned about this, and they stayed for an extra hour beyond the meeting to say the harm that they see going on with this. And I guess I'm asking us all to like listen to what educators are saying. They tell me and Deb McCarthy, our vice president, repeatedly, this is harming our young people. And then for other students who maybe are able, you know, have the privilege and are able to get through this test, it is still shaping and narrowing the curriculum. Remember, the MCAS is not comprehensive. It tests 3 areas. And I think you ask any parent, any student, they think of schooling as far broader than that. And frankly, our standards address far broader areas than just the 3 MCAS tests. So a one-time test does not get at what we really, the full range of things that we care about in our public schools. And that's why I think I was mentioning in my open comments, the really exciting work that's going on with the MCIEA, the Mass Consortium for Innovative Assessment and Education, Jack Schneider, one of our members at UMass Amherst, and his Education Commonwealth Project. They are building on what people are doing around the country, true, authentic performance assessments, but also surveys and ways at getting at school culture and what is happening in a school that's lifting up children, not just as test takers, but actually as full humans. So what I guess I'm suggesting in response to some of this is, let's get back to hearing what the actual experience is in the classrooms and among the students and the educators, because it has been profound for me to listen over and over to our members talk about the impact of this on their own practice as professionals and on their students who have been hemmed in or are suffering the harm from this testing, high stakes regime.
Max, you brought up one second, Ed. Max, you brought up alternative assessments, and I just want to be clear. It was not in your position that MCAS should be replaced with an alternative assessment. It is a statewide assessment.
Well, the Thrive Act is a bill that we have supported, has 3 parts. One is an elimination of the high stakes MCAS test as a graduation requirement, the elimination of the kind of receivership, which is kind of based on the MCAS scores. MCAS scores are used in large measure to take over districts. But the third part was to develop a better set of assessment tools. And frankly, if we are not, part of the problem is when you have the high stakes, the graduation requirement, the pressure ripples out from central office into classrooms. And so that there is not space and time to do the kind of innovative, real performance assessments, you know, performances, debates, projects, group projects that really are a way of getting at what students have really learned. And I do have to note, I hope this isn't bad, Ed, but I was struck that a survey you did of your own members about what they want in education, that the 2/3 of them want that students have applied skills such as communications, problem solving, and teamwork. And almost 2/3 want increased hands-on experiential learning opportunities. These were the members of the Mass Business Alliance for Education about what were the most important policies they wanted to see developed. That's not the stuff that's on the MCAS. That's the stuff that takes place in real learning.
But Max, I don't understand why you're suggesting that you can only have one or the other. I mean, the MCAS is and the graduation requirement is designed to ensure that students have reached a minimum level of academic achievement that's going to allow them to be successful as they gain these other skills, both in high school and beyond. So I don't see anything inconsistent with that at all. And certainly I think that with MCAS 2.0, which, by the way, folks should know, the standards that are used right now, the statewide standard, are run by educators, content experts, and high school teachers and others as part of a decision-making process. They didn't come from another planet. They didn't come from out of state. They were part of a decision-making process that educators came together and said, this is what students need to know at a minimum in order for them to graduate from high school. And so it's a very well thought out process. And going from that single statewide standard to having 330 districts decide what they think is important, what their expectations are, what their content is, and how they will assess it, is going to bring us back to the days when there is some real serious inequity. Look, I do want to clear up and make sure that I'm on the record with regard to those students who are still having trouble achieving their competency determination. We should be concerned about 7 students, 1 student, 700 students who are not crossing that threshold. I don't think that those 700 students are served well by eliminating the statewide requirement. The better way to serve those students is not to suggest to them that they can't meet the standard, so we won't have one. The better way to serve those 700 students is to do more to make sure that they achieve that standard. And that's what we need to do. If those students have passed their coursework and gotten grades similar to their peers who have passed the same coursework, then they should be eligible to receive their competency determination with help from their local school. Because right now the law allows that. The current system allows that. They can file an appeal based on their cohort. So if they have gotten grades that equal the GPAs of their peers in that school, even if they haven't passed the test, they can and should be given their diploma. So we think that there are plenty of ways in which we can account for either testing bias and those other things that may have been raised as part of this policy conversation. But there's no doubt that we're not serving students well at all if we simply say, we think you can't pass it, so therefore we're not going to have that standard. Max mentioned the Thrive Act. I know there are a lot of other components to that Thrive Act. But that's not what we're debating here. Whether there's language in the Thrive Act that talks about other assessments, the fact is that the ballot question itself does not have a replacement for MCAS. It essentially would eliminate the use of MCAS and bring us back to a system with no alternative and with no accountability and or assessment with regard to helping ensure that students are meeting the threshold that we all want them to meet to be successful in the future.
So I just think, Mandy, if I may, I think there's just an important debate that's going on here. One is that there is a belief by Ed, the MBAE, and other Ed reformers that having a high stakes graduation requirement is the key. And they've been promising this for many, many years. In fact, that was part of the promise, that by having this high stakes graduation test, we will narrow the achievement, the gaps between different groups. But I think the question should be turned back on those groups, because as I said at the beginning, it's so clear by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's own numbers that it was money that mattered the most, the investments in the schools, and paired with state standards. And I think we're just going to have disagreements here, because there are standards. There are state standards that every district has to follow, and they are much broader than the 3 areas that are tested in the MCAS. but it is so clear. I feel like those who advocate for the high stakes graduation requirement, they need to answer to the question of, well, you promised us that this would be so important to narrowing the achievement gap, when it really has not. When the best proof we have is that when you have high standards and substantial, consistent investment in people, buildings, programs, that's when you saw not just a better test scoring, but higher graduation rates and other ways to show that students did better. And we did consistently for 10 or 15 years. Then we dropped off. And then frankly, because of MTA and many others, we won the Student Opportunity Act that has secured lots more investment.
Again, it's not dispositive, Max. It's both. And you've never heard MBAE or some other organization say it's not about money. It's about both money and reform. And the combination of those things back in '93 has led this state to be incredibly successful. And this graduation requirement, when it was implemented for the class of 2006, has helped see graduation rates increase, and a narrowing, not a closing, of the achievement gap. We should be honest about what the data tells us and completely agree with that. But we stand with you in terms of supporting the Student Opportunity Act. We served on the Foundation Budget Review Commission. It was our work that actually led to identification that we weren't spending enough money. But money alone is not and should not be the answer. How we spend that money is very important. And data shows us that there are practices, best practices that really help move the needle for students. And we hope that it's a combination of both money and the right investments that will really help those 700 students and anyone else who needs more support than they're currently getting to cross that finish line and be successful in their achievement in the future.
All right, I'm going to jump in and pivot us a little early to questions, because there's a very engaged audience out there listening to you both right now. And Max, I think a lot of these are directed towards you, so I'm going to start there. I think the overall concern seems to be that if the MCAS is not there to illuminate disparities, then we're back to where we were again before Massachusetts education reform. There's also concerns when you said that standards and grades would be the accountability, that there's concerns in the chat about grade inflation and whether that grades would tell the whole picture. I guess just overall this sense from a taxpayer standpoint that schools need a sword hanging over them. What do you make of those questions and criticisms?
Yeah, so as I think I really want to emphasize again, that part of the 1993 Act's brilliance was that it created statewide standards and invested funds. That's been the key to our success, is long-term. When we've done well in those years, it has been when we've been willing to invest in the professionalism of our educators and having standards that guide the work we do. And I said that in my opening statement, the MCAS is a misleading guide to what is happening in our schools. Far better are the having standards and the grades that are developed by the teachers, and that's, as I said, been proven over and over again that students' grades in courses by educators are far more important for the success. And I have to remind people maybe who've joined later as well. There are a lot of district testing that goes on, that each district has testing. Educators do this every single day. That is what they do. Mary Cowie, one of our great teachers out here in Northampton, retired now, used to say, like, my job is to know where those students are and to lift them up. I don't need a test to tell me where this student is and that student is. So we think that the MCAS has been, as a graduation requirement, has been harmful, and we will still have that test. And so I guess the question goes back to having this, why there's an emphasis by the business community on having this graduation requirement, when the core of our success is investing in our educators and having our state standards.
Mandy, let me just say there's a real clear answer to that. And I explained it in my opening that 30 years ago, we had 330 different standards. And we should have one state standard. And I have to say
we have one state standard. Well,
but Max, let me see if you can follow my logic here. It's misleading to tell the public, well, we're going to eliminate the use of MCAS, and we're going to keep a statewide standard. And there'll be this single statewide standard, and the thousands of teachers we have will assess those standards. Standard setting isn't just about the content. That's important, but it's not just about the content. It's about the expectations and then how you assess whether or not the standards are achieved. If you use a different assessment, you're essentially changing the standard or having a different standard across districts. In fact, I would argue that you could have different standards in the same school. The New York Times just published an article a couple of weeks ago where teachers in districts there were complaining that they were getting pressure from administrators to inflate grades. Every school could look at this very differently. They could choose what content to use from the state standards. They don't have to use it all. They could have different community expectations based on who their students are. Or they could simply just have different styles of grading. And then we would have different standards across the system. So we're not, I think we just think it's a little bit misleading to say that we're still going to have a single statewide standard. When you assess it differently, that changes the standard. And I think that's important to know.
I want to address, there were some questions in the chat about alternative assessments, performance-based assessments, and I want to sort of get to the root of each of your arguments. And if we were to say that starting this spring, we have come down from the heavens, the perfect assessment that everybody agrees measures all aspects of a student, emotionally, socially, academically, and it is something that is not too big of a burden on teachers. Say we have this perfect assessment that is not a bubble-in test. Do you want that? Or do you want nothing? Or do you want to keep your bubble test?
We want to, so let me say one thing about this. When you look at a student's ability to achieve in a school and have successful experience in school, roughly half of it has to do with what they bring to it, the kind of conditions they grow up in, the struggles they have, the supports they have. There's a lot of things outside of schools that matter, which is why the MTA has been putting so much energy into addressing minimum wage, paid family medical leave, sick leave, etc. And then the rest is what happens in a school. And the absolutely most important thing that happens in a school is supporting outstanding educators who have the time to prepare, develop, collaborate, and then work with their students together. So performance assessments are about, the good ones are the ones that help those educators be the professionals that they are, and then really get to know where students are on a range of skills. These assessments, Mandy, that you're referring to, there's the New York Consortium that has been using these alternative performance assessments for years. They have tracked this, and their students do better when they go on to college. They get in and then they stay in and they succeed. They've done a long-term study of this. So the notion that you need some high stakes test is not right at all. And absolutely, we want to move in the direction where we support educators to use as broad a range of performance-based testing as possible. The most important thing I just want to keep emphasizing, what matters to all of us. Think for a moment, all of you listening, what made the difference for your education, whether if you had a good or bad or mediocre or whatever, whatever experience you had, the best part of it was when you had an outstanding educator, a teacher, a paraprofessional, someone who had the time and energy and professionalism to support your learning and development. That's for all of us. I can list right for you 10 teachers I had growing up in the Amherst public schools that made the difference. It was not a test that made the difference. It was supporting those educators. And we have a real problem because educators are fleeing the profession for a lot of reasons, but part of it is because of sense of deprofessionalizing, that they are supposed to be test monitors, that they are not being respected as full professionals that they are.
Mm-hmm. Just to be clear though, I'm trying to understand if it is the type of requirement or having a requirement at all. So if that perfect assessment existed, would you want that as a way to gauge a unified statewide look, or is the argument that there just should not be that high stakes requirement at all?
We believe in high standards, and we believe in educators following a curriculum and using good kind of assessments to know where their students are. that's what has always made public education great. And frankly, Massachusetts has always had that. And the biggest problem is we have huge gaps between the wealthiest districts and the poorest districts, and we need to make sure that those districts get the support that they need.
And those gaps will widen if we don't have a common assessment. And that's the answer to your question that I respectfully suggest Max didn't answer. Will we support a common assessment as opposed to individual assessments? That is the difference. I completely agree with him that teachers make all the difference. Great teaching makes all the difference. You can assess great teaching with a common assessment. And it's important to do that because that's where you can instruct good teaching, where you can separate good teaching from bad teaching. You can only do that with a common assessment. Every test can be improved. MCAS can be improved. It's a very good measure and it's well respected around the country, but it can be improved. And it's not just a bubble test. Essays are required on MCAS. The state is doing some very good things right now in the science MCAS area with simulation projects and the like. So we're assessing broader skills. We can and should, and I think Max raised this earlier, give the test in different languages so we can help ELL students, see if there are things that we can do that will reduce test time. Those all make sense, but we need a common assessment. Right now, the common assessment we use in Massachusetts is called MCAS. It's a good tool. It could always be improved, but that's the difference in philosophy, I think, that we have here. If you don't have a common assessment, you will never be able to measure whether or not your students are meeting the statewide standard that you espouse to embrace.
And unfortunately, we've moved again to evaluating whether there's an MCAS or not. There will be an MCAS. So if people find value in having this thing that is offered identically all over the state for some diagnostic value, we're still going to have that. It's a federal requirement. So the only question really is about whether you want to use a high stakes test, a limited one-time test to determine whether a student gets a diploma. And if I could just say the most perfect assessment is a teacher using a full year of assessments that they design and develop to understand how well their students have done. And it's there. I know there's this sort of invented concern about 300 different standards. There's not. And it's been proven that grades that teachers give are a better reflection and a better predictor of how students will do. So that's why we're going to have the MCAS. We are getting rid of what has been harmful to our young people and to our educators over these many years.
Yeah, I guess I would close by first thanking you for the opportunity to engage in this conversation. But agreeing with you on this point, it really is not about the test. The ballot question that you're proposing would eliminate the single statewide standard that we have for all students. And that will reduce equity. It will reduce expectations. It will reduce standards. And we think that's dangerous. We have great teachers in this Commonwealth who we know can help every student meet that single statewide bar. And we think that's where our efforts should be, helping make sure that students are completely college and career ready. And the MCAS has been shown to demonstrate that with success on the MCAS, you can achieve that. We've got to help every student reach that bar.
And I'll just make my closing very, very brief, which is the most grateful joy about my job is I talk to educators every day. And what they say is that the most important part is the teaching that they do and not to be evaluated by a one-size-fits-all standardized test. And so I really urge everyone to talk to their educators about this issue.
And with that, I am going to say thank you so much to Mandy for moderating a really, really excellent conversation, a true debate.
Mandy, thank you.
And we began by saying that our goal is to help educate the public about these critical, really vital issues. I can say for myself, I am a more informed consumer here after hearing both of you and look forward to learning even more. So thank you so much. I know we all share a common goal of, using your words, lifting up all the students and helping ensure that every student in this Commonwealth achieves success defined expansively. So thank you for all the work you do to help make that happen.
Thanks so much.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
Thank you all.